I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Fletcher, the Chief Executive of OFWAT, as our thought leader for today. Rachel, welcome.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Lila.
It's a pleasure. Now, I should start by wishing you a Happy New Year.
Thank you, and to you.
Thank you. And with the final determinations that were issued just before Christmas, I would imagine that some of the water companies weren't potentially looking forward to a Happy New Year with the stretching targets. Now, I know that the press were overwhelmingly supportive of the final determinations, but what would you say are the key messages that you would like for the industry to pay attention to over the next period?
Well, I think with the price review out of the way, actually, I'm hoping that most companies are looking to press on and improve their business over the AMP period. And actually, if you look at our strategy document, which we published in October last year, we're saying that we've got three big ambitions and goals for the sector. One is to transform its performance. The second is to really get to grips with some of the strategic issues facing the industry, and I can talk about them a little bit as we converse. And the third is to improve the amount of public value that companies provide as they go about their business. So actually what I'm hoping is that the water companies now are thinking, all right, we've got the settlement, we've got the clarity of the settlement, we've got the election out of the way and the uncertainty associated with politics. Let's get on and meet these ambitions. And frankly, over the next AMP, I'm really looking forward to working with the industry in meeting those ambitions.
Thank you. That's a great start. Now, I suppose one of the sort of questions to build up on that was with the cost efficiencies, the reduced return on capital, the stretching targets on leakage, supply interruptions. Some water companies and others have said that the targets are unachievable and the programme is unfinanceable. How would you see that?
Well, we've set the targets based on looking across the board at what companies had in their own business plans. We set them on an upper quartile basis based on companies' own ambitions. So they've not been plucked from thin air. They're based on a lot of analysis. They're based on customer research in terms of what customers expect and are willing to pay for. So yes, they are going to be stretching for companies that have been behind the curve. But firstly, I think they are the targets that companies should be aiming for to deliver for customers and the environment. And secondly, I think a company really focusing its mind on these targets should be able to achieve them. The last thing to say there, I think, is, of course, if a company really thinks that they're not going to be able to deliver on their legal obligations, their license commitments, their commitments to stakeholders for the amount of money that we have in the settlement, then they should appeal the matter to the CMA. The CMA is there to make sure that we do end up with settlements that properly fund companies for delivering what's expected of them.
And I think that sort of leads on to the next point around sort of the water companies, because you've got a diverse range of companies serving a diverse range of communities. And they've obviously got their individual specific challenges that they're addressing. So some of the questions have also been around, do you think that the stretching targets are achievable for all of the water companies, or do you feel the final determinations takes into account the differences in localities and the challenges that each one's are facing?
It definitely does take into account differences in localities. We've not done a one-size-fits-all. If you look carefully at our determinations, you'll see the thought that we've given on cost allowances, the impact that being urban or rural has on costs and various other factors, the rate of growth in the areas. So we have looked to take those issues into account. We have listened very carefully as well to representations that companies have given us. You will have seen that we've moved from our own view of what companies need by way of costs and indeed what's appropriate by way of targets between draft and final determinations. I'm also pleased to see that the companies as well responded to the challenges we were giving throughout the price review process. So we've seen some companies very significantly cut back on what they were asking customers for because they could see the ambition and the efficiencies that other companies were planning to make. So I think we've landed in a good place. I think if we have appeals at the CMA, then we're ready to deal with those. But I don't want that to detract from the really key message that now is the time to crack on. We have got really big challenges in this sector. I think we can already see, those of us who watch the news, those of us who saw what happened in Yorkshire over the autumn just gone, that climate change is presenting real challenges to the delivery of services, to the assets in this sector. We already know that there is degradation of natural habitats, partly in some cases through over-abstraction. And we know that there's population growth. And we cannot afford just to bumble along as we are and hope that somehow we can deliver safe, resilient water and waste supplies in the context of those big challenges whilst keeping water affordable. And that mission is very, very dear to my heart. I believe it is very dear to those that run the water companies. But I'm afraid that living up to that mission means that we've got to press hard on efficiency, we've got to press hard on innovation, and we've got to look to work together to really address those joint challenges.
I agree, and I think one of the things that you've sort of highlighted is the 13 billion set aside for resilience. And I think that's going to be really key moving forward. And I know that you've also got enhancement funding as well. So how do you sort of see those sort of playing out, and where do you feel that the supply chain can sort of help deliver on those projects?
Well, I mean, those of your members who've had a chance to look at the water companies' plans will see that pretty much every penny of that 13 billion and how it's going to be spent is set out in the plans. We've got environmental expenditure, we've got expenditure for growth, we've got expenditure on upgrading and improving the resilience of critical assets. We've got the direct procurement schemes, and that's not mentioning, by the way, the 12 or the 13 strategic water resource schemes that are currently being explored through the RAPID process. So, the nuts and bolts of what companies expect to do with that money, the big projects that are coming on board, whether those are through delivery for procurement means or through normal RAV expenditure, as well as a further looking stuff on strategic water resources, moving water around so that we don't run out of water in the southeast and other areas of growth. All of that is spelt out in the company's business plans and in our final determinations. So my big message to your members, Lila, is please engage with the companies on the projects that interest you, where you think you've got value to bring. And please also do be assertive in bringing forward your thoughts on innovation and how delivering the resilience and the environmental improvement that is needed and we're asking customers to fund can be done better, could be done in a more cost-effective way or in a way that brings greater public value.
Okay, so you mentioned that you feel that the stretching targets are achievable for all of the water companies, and obviously benchmarking is used to help share best practice, for learning, for maybe them to go overseas and find out what other water companies internationally are doing. How do you see the benchmarking sort of rolling out over the next AMP period and companies really being encouraged to collaborate where they haven't before?
Yeah, so there's sort of different elements of benchmarking. One is obviously we do cost benchmarking, and actually we are considering within OFWAT whether we could be doing that cost benchmarking on a more regular basis, almost within AMP, so that water companies get a feel earlier on how they're performing relative to their peers. So that's an idea we're thinking of, using big data and innovating ourselves as a regulator. And seeing whether we can introduce that. In terms of performance benchmarking, though, I think there is always a tension in this industry, isn't there, between, if you like, competing to be at the top of the pile, particularly to get fast-tracked, versus collaborating on things that are common challenges. And I must say, I am, even the last couple of years, I have seen more by way of collaborations. And actually, leakage is a really good case in point.
Yeah.
I think we have, because OFWAT has been very clear about its ambitions on leakage, and indeed it's a matter that's been in the public domain a lot, the water companies know actually that there is no point working separately on this, and that any gains they might come from looking better than their peers are going to be taken away by the public perception and public concerns about the companies that are at the bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
So I am really pleased to see collaboration happening there. It'd be lovely to know whether that collaboration is starting to be felt by your members actually, and that is giving them if you like, a magnet, a focus point to be pulling in their own learning, their own technology solutions to the piece. But I think we need to recognise that we have created a bit of competition, and it's about identifying those things that are really important to collaborate on, those things that are going to either fundamentally threaten future water supplies and future resilient supplies of water and waste services, or those things that are going to go to the heart of the sector's legitimacy.
Yeah.
So, again, great, I think, that the water companies have put out their public interest commitment, making commitments on not just on leakage, but on plastics, on social inclusion, on water poverty, and on net zero carbon emissions. Those are all areas where we will see the industry collaborating, because they know that unless they work together on those big commitments, they're not going to meet the targets and commitments that they've set out. And I think that's a good illustration of distinguishing between the strategic targets and the strategic issues where collaboration is needed, and, if you like, the more operational parts of performance where actually we do want a bit of competitive tension, and perhaps it's natural that companies keep some of the best ideas to themselves.
I think that sort of brings me on back again to the supply chain, because the supply chain, as you know, are trying to present their innovations to the water companies, and there has been blockages in the past years. So the Innovation Fund, we're hoping, is going to lead to better collaboration, and also the call for a joint innovation strategy again is going to encourage the sector to work more effectively together, plus look overseas for any best practice. And one of the things that I was wondering was, you've also included in your innovation paper the fact that you're going to set up I think a call centre to help innovation in terms of regulation. And I wondered whether you had given some thought, maybe that centre being able to share best practice of international markets as well, or maybe be able to host international delegations who want to understand how the market in England and Wales is regulated.
Yeah, and there's a number of dimensions there, but just to kind of start with the really important point is, we are not going to be able to achieve what we want, resilient, reliable, safe supplies of water and waste services into the future, whilst keeping water affordable and enhancing the environment. We're not going to achieve that without innovation. We're not going to achieve it by more of the same.
Yeah.
So innovation sits absolutely at the core of our strategy. That's why we've said, actually, we need to be part of the solution. We're not going to rely just on the incentives within PR19, and I believe the incentives to innovate within PR19 are strong, but we want to go above and beyond that. So a couple of dimensions to what we can do. The first is, we need to recognise that sometimes regulation gets in the way of innovation, and we also need to recognise that regulation in this sector is quite multidimensional. So we've got some regulatory parts of the regulatory framework. The Environment Agency has, the Drinking Water Inspectorate has. There's slightly different regulations in Wales, and actually we don't always understand what the impact is of all of those different parts of regulations on a company and its willingness and ability to innovate. So that's part of the idea around the one-stop shop, is Can we make it easier for people to come to us in OFWAT, ask questions about the regulatory arrangements, and can we make it easier to kind of join the dots with the other regulators?
Good.
The other part is, anybody who's looked at innovation in the water sector will realise that there are so many different organisations around, all of which are looking at innovation in different ways. And we hear repeatedly from people in the supply chain about their frustrations that, they finally got a door opened by one company, they got their product tested, that company said it was great, that company may even be adopting it, but then they're starting at point zero again. Absolutely. When they go to the next company. This seems to us to be an opportunity to do the testing of the product once, have it, if you like, certified as being of a standard that could be used across the industry, so that people who've got really sort of important technological innovations to bring
Absolutely.
Are not having to start from scratch across all 17 water companies. That's the kind of thing we would like to happen through the innovation strategy, through a centre of excellence, an industry sector of excellence. And we just like to see, again, much more pulling together of the various parties so that we get less duplication of innovation on the same issue. We get that learning shared much more effectively. And critically, we move much more quickly from testing and trialling into rollout, because it's only once we get rollout, of course, that customers and the environment benefit.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things about the Centre of Excellence is the paper mentioned that you don't actually want a physical Centre of Excellence. That's what I gathered, and you want it to be a coordinating body, because I think one of the concerns that we had, and maybe others had, in our response to the innovation consultation and the joint letter that we submitted for our response was we don't want any sort of duplication of processes or any sort of new bodies established in order to help deliver innovation for the sector. So it's great that you've got a coordination body in mind, and hopefully that's what it will look like using the existing assets in each of the water companies. And I'm not sure, if you would agree with that.
Well, I think what I would say is a huge amount of money has been spent on innovation, and we're not seeing the returns from that investment. So yes, right. I'd agree with you. The sector doesn't need another body. We do need to be better at coordinating and taking that learning into the business and rolling things out. And that, I think, is where some of the culture change might arise that you mentioned, Lila. Why is it that great bit of technology isn't getting adopted in your business? It might have nothing to do with the technology. It might have something to do with your procurement process, for example. It might have something to do with the mindset of the people making the decisions about what technology they use. So how can we get to the root? How can the water companies get to the root of those blockages? That is what's going to make the difference and bring about transformation.
So in terms of the future and the enhancement projects that are planned and all these big schemes, one of the things that we now say within British Water is that we represent the supply community rather than the supply chain, because at the end of the day, we don't want the sector working in silos. We do have water companies now in membership. So what we're trying to do is help bring people together to facilitate that transformation that you want to see in the industry. So I think one of the things that I'd like to touch on with you is, obviously, as a regulator, there's tension between OFWAT and obviously the water companies, and then the supply chain are here. And how do you feel that we could best work together for the future, rather than it just being the regulator here and then the water companies, and then there's sort of friction and toing and froing in discussions, and people saying that's not enough money or that's too stretching a target? How do you think you could ever move to a place where both sides are maybe a bit more happy, or do you think there's always going to be that degree of tension?
Well, look, I think. Well, firstly, we do have PR19 out of the way, bar the shouting, and so we don't need to have a conversation about money and incentives. They are in place, and they probably what we've come up with will be what the vast majority of companies are going to be living with for the next 5 years. Now is the time to collaborate. And actually, the key to collaboration is having a joint goal. So I think we in OFWAT being really clear about what our ambitions are, what our goals are. We are working with DEFRA, with the Environment Agency, with DWI and the Welsh equivalents on what are the long-term targets relating to resilience, relating to the environment, relating to customer trust and legitimacy for this sector, because we want to, if you like, put our ambitions, take them from words into numbers and targets to focus minds somewhat and to give people a horizon, a clarity over a horizon that goes beyond the next 5 years. And I think with those goals in place and those targets, we should then be saying, all right, well, who needs to be part of a discussion to make these ambitions come true? Who needs to be in the conversation about how we improve the ecosystems of our rivers? And let's have this phrase about coming into a meeting and leaving my hat at the door. And there are lots of meetings I go into where I very explicitly leave my OFWAT hat at the door, because fundamentally I'm not in there to represent OFWAT, to make a point on behalf of OFWAT, or to carve out a role, or to carve out boundaries for OFWAT. I'm in that meeting to see how can we work together to improve our environment? How can we work together to make sure we don't run out of water? How can we work together to improve efficiency and effectiveness and the legitimacy of the water sector? So I think, we at the beginning of a new AMP, which we are only a number of months away from, we should all be asking ourselves, what are the conversations I need to be part of? Not to represent my own interests, my own vested interests, but because I might have something to offer by way of ideas, by way of being able to influence others, by way of powers, as we do in OFWAT. And I think we've already got examples of this happening in the industry. The national framework that was set up in 2018 to consider long-term water resource planning has made incredible strides, and that has involved government, Environment Agency, ourselves working together with the water companies, and we're on the cusp of transforming how long-term water resource planning works in this industry. We're on the cusp of getting closer to being able to plan for some really big strategic schemes that have been talked about for years but have never got beyond the talking phase. So I think we should be learning from those examples, those successes, and applying and adapting that model for some of the other big strategic challenges that we've got.
It's been really positive to hear, actually, that you say that you leave your hat at the door because you're open to hearing ideas, you're open to collaborating. And I think from what I've read, that OFWAT have also been looking at other sectors, because obviously you came from Ofgem and you're looking at what other people are doing in defence. So that's also interesting in terms of the innovation model as to what it might look like in the next, I suppose, when it's launched in the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned already, there's a huge amount we can learn from other sectors. I think we all, including OFWAT, need to be more outward-looking. We can, and perhaps PR19 has required us to be quite insular-looking. Now is the time to go out and about and refresh our understanding of what's happening out there in other sectors. But the other thing that's really important and that has become very, very clear through the water resource planning conversations is, as a water sector, we are deeply connected to other sectors of the economy. There's no point figuring out water supply adequacy if we don't have enough water to grow our own food. So engaging with agriculture is vital. Equally, the nexus between energy and water in the context of net carbon zero is massive.
Yeah.
Are we working together and thinking about how we deliver the new towns that government is expecting to be built over the next few years? Are we working together with other infrastructure and essential service providers to come up with something that's truly sustainable and truly affordable? That's not something the water sector can do by itself. It's about talking to energy, it's about talking to transport. So I think we need to kind of shift our mindset, and I'm hoping that in OFWAT we do a bit of leading by example there too.
So one of our key messages, Rachel, is that we are connecting today's industry for tomorrow's global future. And you touched on it earlier in terms of what we could do as British Water to help better enable innovation, better enabling SMEs to get access to the water companies and to really collaborate as a supply community. So in closing, what do you think British Water could do better? I mean, feel free to say, what do you think we could do better as an industry body to represent the sector and to help deliver the change that you think you'd like to see?
So I think it's really important that we do have a body like British Water. You talk about the supply community, and I relate to that concept. I mean, I talked about the water sector not being able to work by itself, but equally the water companies cannot deliver what we and society and customers are looking for without all of your members doing their bit. So I think continuing to help your members understand what the industry is that they're part of and that they play an absolutely fundamental role in. And I love that strapline, by the way, because I kind of think that we could all come to work and work very, very hard for the next few years, but if my grandchildren can't afford their water bill, or the rivers that I really enjoy walking along are all dried up, we will have failed. So helping people understand the context in which they're working is really, really important. Helping your members engage with us as a regulator so that our decisions are better informed, are better cognizant of your members' needs. And continuing to bring the water companies and the supply chain together into a proper community and empowering their voice to be heard. I know many of your members feel like the only conversation they ever have with the water companies is about price. And I think part of your role, isn't it, is to really get that voice heard about what all the various members that you have can bring by way of new ideas, new technologies and solutions to, it's not just the industry's problems, is it, and challenges, it's the challenges that we face as a country and indeed as a human race, if that's not exaggerating things too much.
And then, Rachel, can I turn to the value of water? Because obviously there's an argument that people say that, water at the moment is really cheap, which is why people don't value it. They just turn on their tap, they flush their toilet, whatever. What's the sort of view that you have on that in terms of the price determinations versus the true value in terms of the cost of treating it, delivering it to people's homes and industries?
Well, I mean, I think firstly I would say is that the price of water reflects the costs that the companies face in terms of providing public water and waste supplies. I think we also need to remember that 3 million homes in England and Wales struggle to pay their water bills. So the average of £400 a year, roughly £1 a day, might not sound like much to people in our circumstances, but 3 million households would say otherwise. And so we do take the role of ensuring that the companies are efficient and remain efficient very seriously for all of those reasons. I think value shouldn't get mixed up with price, and increasing the price doesn't mean that you would necessarily value water anymore. I think there is a question about awareness. I have to say, until I joined the water sector, I didn't know what impact abstraction was having, say, on our chalk streams. I didn't actually realise what a risk to pollution I was causing by what I put down the loo. So I think that there is a real importance around education. I'm seeing more and more water companies really take that seriously. And I think there is a question which we've been posing for many months now, actually, about whether we need a national campaign, whether we need an awareness raising exercise. Because there's been, I think people are very aware of carbon, they're very aware of the impact of their energy use on the environment.
Yes.
But that awareness of the impact of how we use water and what we do with our waste services is way behind that. So I would be very much in favour of improving people's value and the value they place on water, but I would suggest we need to think 2 or 3 times before we think we will achieve that by putting up the price of water.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for being our thought leader today. It was really interesting to hear what you had to say following the final determinations. And obviously, we'll see what happens in February, whether anybody appeals. But thank you so much for sharing your insight today.
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.